All right, last time we met, I talked about Alfred Nobel and the Nobel Prize. Yes, and in 1962, the Nobel Prize was won for pants. No, really, I meant jeans. But wasn't really one for jeans. Anyway, I'm going to tell you today the story of the 1962 Nobel Prize and the tragic, ironic tale of Ms. Dr. Rosalind Franklin.
All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn on time. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
He's interested too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class. And he's super cool. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
All right, in the early 1950s, people knew that DNA probably was they knew. It had the instructions, like that was the important part. Like they'd witnessed mitosis. So like, man, whatever's in the chromatin, whatever's in the chromosomes must be important for separating to make sure that the instructions get sent to the next generation. The problem is nobody really knew how it worked. And they imagined, look at all the living things on Earth. It's got to be quite complicated. Hey, and to be honest, at the time, there was kind of a race to figure it out. How does DNA actually work? And everybody figured there was a guy named Linus Pauling who's a super famous scientist, and he was working with DNA, and everybody figured he would figure it out. But these two men right here, James Watson and Francis Crick, were like really bent on figuring out, almost like beating Linus Pauling to this prize. They knew that DNA was a big deal, and they knew they could figure it out, right? At the same time, there's a woman named Rosalind Franklin who was working on taking pictures. She took pictures with X-rays, okay, X-ray crystallography, and this picture right here, this is picture number 51. It wound up being like the breakthrough. So she was really interested in discovering how DNA worked, and she was going to do it by observing the structure of DNA. She took this picture of DNA, and Watson and Crick wound up using that picture to construct a model. It basically showed them how to put the jigsaw puzzle together, which was a big deal because putting the jigsaw puzzle together was the way, like by uncovering the structure, was the way they uncovered the function. Maybe I can explain it a little better. They figured out that DNA, first of all, was built like this, they call it a double helix, or it looks like a twisted rope ladder. This is that classic look, right? Like a spiral staircase, a double helix. The outsides of the helix aren't really what's important. Those are made up of sugars and some phosphates, but the rungs of the ladder, those are made up of what are called nucleotide bases. And they figured that it would be really, really complicated, but in reality, it's unbelievably simple. There are 4 nucleotide bases. They're called guanine, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. You only need to know them by their initials, G, C, A, T. And in the ladder, they always pair up the same way. G always pairs up across from C. A always pairs across from T. Always. No exceptions.
A goes with T. G goes with C.
It's the only way it works. So it's almost like DNA, the instructions for life, were encoded in 4 chemicals that only occurred in basically 2 combinations. Really simple. Surprise, shockingly simple.
Whoa, mind blown.
The first thing that allowed them to figure it out was like, oh, this is how replication can happen. Oh, that slide's out of order. Okay, let me see. Yeah, there you go. Right? To do replication, to copy a strand, all you have to do is unzip the DNA molecule and then match up A's, T's, G's, and C's.
A goes with T. G goes with C.
And you wind up with 2 identical strands. That's what happens during replication, before mitosis. And It's easier than they thought it would be because it's just matching up two pairs. A's go with T's, T's go with C.
A goes with T, G goes with C.
Right, this is the same sequence. Okay. So right off the bat, they were able to explain how replication worked. Later, other scientists would go on to figure out that the A's, T's, C's, and G's were kind of like a secret code that we're going to learn, of course, later in class. Okay. So they did this work in 1953. Okay, 1953, Watson and Crick published their work. At the same time, Franklin published her work. What she didn't know at that time was that Watson and Crick actually stole her picture.
That does not seem very fair.
And they were able to figure out how DNA was built from her picture that they stole. Now, eventually they gave her credit. They did give her credit. But in 1962, 9 years after the discovery, after what they found was tested and retested and tested again and checked and double checked, that's how science works. 9 years later, Watson got the Nobel Prize. He met the King of Sweden, got the medal, and at that time, probably about $1 million. Francis Crick met the King of Sweden, got the medal, Nobel Prize laureate, and again, the big money. Rosalind Franklin, no prize.
That does not seem very fair.
It's sad. Why wouldn't she win the prize? I mean, winning Nobel Prize it's like being an Academy Award winning actor. You get better roles, right? If you're a scientist and you're a Nobel Prize winner, that gets you better gigs. Like James Watson basically didn't do very much after discovering DNA. He did a few extra things, but then basically lived his life just going around giving university talks on how he discovered DNA. And same with Crick. They both lived to be very old men. So why wouldn't Rosalind get the prize? What was it about her? I mean, was it the fact that she didn't know that they stole? But they admitted that they used it. They gave her credit, so she should have deserved the prize. It's because she was a woman, and to be honest, at that time, even now, but more so at that time in the 50s, there were very few women in science, and they usually weren't given the respect they deserve. Maybe that was it. Right? I mean, but she basically published the same thing they did at the same time. They got the prize. She didn't get the prize.
Really? Are you kidding me?
If you're paying attention to yesterday's videos, you already know the answer to this question, but it wasn't really that malicious. It wasn't something. Watson and Crick gave her credit. If you ask them now, they say, yes, she deserved the prize. They're sad that she didn't get it. Okay? It wasn't because she was a woman. Marie Curie had won the Nobel Prize, and she was a woman. She had won that like 20 years before. What was the reason? X-rays. Rosalind Franklin spent her whole working life taking pictures with X-rays. If you know anything about X-rays, you know that X-rays can damage DNA. That's why when you go to the dentist, they put that lead blanket over you. That's why the dental hygienist and the dentist leave the room every time they take pictures. They know how bad it is for. Rosalind didn't know that it damaged DNA because she didn't know how DNA worked. Because she figured out how DNA worked, we know now why her DNA was damaged. She wound up developing cancer because of damaged DNA. Right? If she didn't do what she didn't figure out that we know now, she wouldn't have died of cancer. But because she did what she did to figure out what we know now about DNA, she lost her life. It's tragic. It's a tragic irony of, if she knew what we know now, she never would have done the work to explain what we know now.
Whoa.
Yeah, so Rosalind Franklin would have won the Nobel Prize for sure. Again, actually, she would have probably won it a second time because there was somebody else. She did some other work that wound up being pretty groundbreaking. But in a nutshell, what we're going to learn about DNA is that DNA has the plans for life. And the number one thing that Watson, Crick, and Franklin figured out was that it should be complicated, but it's actually really simple, which now that I think about it makes sense. If it was complicated, it'd be really hard to copy. things, right? They figured out the shape of a DNA molecule was called the double helix. And then later on, they were able to see that the four chemicals that make up the rungs of the ladder, the spiral staircase, are also a coded message that codes for proteins. And every living thing uses the exact same code.
Wait, it's that simple?
Every living thing. If you're an amoeba, you use the same code as a jellyfish, who uses the same code as an elephant, who uses the same code as a people. All right, we'll talk about the code as we continue.
Whoa, mind blown.